Dear ISTP, why do you let people consistently step on you? Why can't I beat you at Gauntlet? When are you going to give me your cat?
What?
I wonder if inferior FE actually recognizes its limits with FE before dominant FE does. Because dominant
Hmm.
FE, it took me so much longer to recognize the limits of FE and how should control it. But it seems like people with inferior FE, because it's not something they naturally use, they can recognize that limitation a lot faster. Because I mean, I guess if it's your dominant function, it's also your hero and you're guided by it, so it's hard not to to understand exactly.
It's possible. I mean, in my case, I had to learn what the limits were,
Mm,
because it's. I think it's different for different people because the typical way FE inferior functions are described is like you develop it later in life or like in midlife. I think it just depends on like a person's experiences. Like like in my case, I was exposed to like situations that kind of triggered my FE. Those people, those depressed people that I encountered. That could have happened at any time in my life, and so it's things like that that kind of forced me to learn what my limits were. Of course, I didn't know what FE was at the time, but I still had to learn what my limits were. Um, and but I think I don't think it's necessarily that your where FE is located on your functional stack that makes you more or less aware of your limits. It's just I think it's just the things you experience, the things that your FE causes you to do, that kind of forces you
well, no,
to
yeah.
figure
I
it
mean,
out.
I agree that every person experiences it differently, but I think that if your function is inferior, at the point, and whatever point that is for that person, that you do go through some kind of overextended use of it, you're more likely to fall out of it quicker because it's something that you don't use as often. But I mean,
Yeah.
the idea of developing your functions in your midlife is kind of like a generic developmental path of people maybe who just function automatically and don't really think of their conscious selves. But I've
Hmm.
noticed a lot of people who do start to think about it or look into themselves, understand these things and go through these things a lot earlier in life. And it's all for the better
Yeah.
too.
Yeah. I think but yeah, I think it's just situations where you overuse that function. Um, like even me, my TI, like people have told I've often been told that I think too much, and sometimes I agree, sometimes I disagree. Um, and yeah, I think I don't know. That's something I haven't really thought about, like going through each of the functions and like how does a function get overused?
Oh,
Like how like how would TE get overused?
well, I guess in a TE user.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe an ESTJ or an ENTJ or an ISTJ, maybe for them that would be an external projection because it is a external judging function where they would kind of start becoming adamant about setting their desired framework onto the external world. Like, no, things should be this way, things should be that way. I'm going to go and rearrange everything and make it happen. And so they might become almost obsessive about making this vision they have come true by using TE to force it onto the environment. For example, maybe Hitler. That's an example, but I really don't know what functions he used. But TE, though, is more likely to focus on, or less on people so much as how to rearrange the concepts of the external world in a desirable manner. Because FE does the same thing, but it's almost along social threads. So I guess maybe TE would focus on, well, not social, but maybe more conceptual. I don't know. I don't know as much about those functions, the ones that I don't use,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah, I don't even know why I picked TE as an example, but neither of us have it. Um, but yeah, I mean, in general, though, I mean, just not even talking about MBTI, I think people will do something until it doesn't work for them. And so, like, if you're, if using FE a lot works for you, then you'll just keep on using it as to your heart's content.
Mm.
And that's only if you're in situations that where that really take advantage of that. And like in my case, if I'm in a situation where I can really use my TI, I think that's probably been the case throughout most of my life, where my TI was valued and useful because I was able to use it to study computer science or use it to solve problems. Went through school just using my powers of processing. And I didn't use, and actually kind of goes back to why I don't meet certain SP stereotypes. I didn't really use SE a whole lot while I was growing up.
Mm.
I mean, I used it to maybe draw diagrams of like my dad's stereo system, or just like piece numbers together, or like, or just numerical representations of just certain concepts that were in my head. Um, but as far as SE in the real world, yeah, I just I didn't never went out exploring that much. Um, so I often think that maybe my SE was slightly underdeveloped, for
Mm.
compared to other SPs, and at the same time, I think my NI might have been a little bit more developed, and so that's why I used to actually test borderline S and N on those online tests.
How would
Um,
you, oh, that's one thing I'm really curious about. NI for ISTPs. I don't really hear a lot about that. What is it like for you?
um, Mainly, it supports my TI. Um, and actually, if you go on the ISTP forum, you probably see people talking about something called the TI-NI loop.
Oh, I've heard about that before with
Yeah,
INFJs, or no, not INFJs, sorry. Yes, INFJs.
yeah.
Yeah, with that.
So yeah, INFJs and ISTPs, it's the same two functions. Um, where it's basically if you're denied use of your auxiliary function, the extroverted auxiliary function, in my case SE, in the INFJ case FE, you'll get into this sort of you'll kind of withdraw into yourself and just only use those two introverted functions, the TI and NI, and they'll feed off of each other. Where NI is just like imagining these abstract concepts, and TI is processing it. NI, and it's like the two feed off of each other in a loop. Like NI will like come up with this big picture off of what's been thought of before, and then no new information is going into it because there's no extrovert function like taking in information or doing anything with it. Um, and so um, I think that I probably relate to that in some ways because like that's probably why I'm even more introverted than typical ISTPs because I probably used a lot of TI and NI more so than SE throughout my life. And so, that's kind of like my comfort zone is just being, keeping all my thoughts to myself and not doing anything with it and not taking in new information. Um, but that's changed in recent years, in the last couple of years, since I've learned about MBTI and learned about, how much I actually do value going out and enjoying life and experiencing new things. And so I think now, that's why nowadays whenever I take tests online, I'll have a very definite S preference over N.
Yeah,
Um,
I think too, if like these introverted loops between TI and NI, or maybe in NFPs FI and SI, or that kind of introverted loop can get sparked by the like descent into introversion. So maybe like an INFJ just becomes introverted or is forced into a place of isolation, and then because of it, they just happen to start looping on their TI because when you spend a lot of time alone, you don't have that need for that extroverted function. It doesn't have a place. So you just
yeah,
end up focusing on the ones that work with focusing on the subjective self, and those are the ones that get focused on. And the same thing for having an extroverted loop. If you don't spend time alone and you're mostly spending time engaging yourself in everything and anything and being in a really extroverted mindset, you're likely to ignore the introverted functions because they won't really have a purpose at the time. And so it's almost like that loop can be initiated by a preference for one or the other, or maybe like I don't know, because like I know like one guy who's an INFJ and he went through that TI and I loop still in it, I think, because he like wouldn't interact with people a lot, so FE didn't have a purpose as much,
mm,
except for it to become directed almost like in an impaired manner as an introverted focus through TI. So then when you talk to him, he'd appear to be social and kind of open, but there was a clear wall between him and you. And for the most part, he had pretty harsh opinions, and um, he had very carefully tailored thoughts about things just because he'd spent so much time focusing on that. And his idea of reality became reduced to this very harsh idea um, that he had a lot of ideas that he just kind of had spent so much time thinking about and not applying with FE or SE that he'd start to have like these opinions that you're like, how did you come to that conclusion? Like, why are you thinking this? Like, clearly that's not something that can be supported consistently in reality. Like, that's not. And so, um, yeah, I don't know. I pay attention to that a lot for differences in types. So, like different
Mhm.
kinds of INFJs or different kinds of ISTPs, and whether or not they have more of a focus on one or the other. And when it comes down to it, it's always the people that I can't type or can't figure out their type are the people who are the most balanced because
Really?
they don't look like the caricature of the type that's focusing on the top two functions. Because most of the descriptions of the types are talking about, like, for an ISTP, you'll see the most common descriptions are about T, I, and SE. But if you have an ISTP that's balanced themselves out through all four of the functions and they're kind of like a more well-rounded person, they look less like an ISTP. And the
Okay, you're talking
idea,
about.
so like, I don't know, they're harder for me to type because they come across as so many different things. And it's because they're more balanced that way.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying now.
Sorry.
Um,
I feel like I'm boring you with these random questions. I'm like,
oh,
going off on tangents.
oh, no, it's just, yeah, this is interesting so far. Um, but yeah, I think I've always had a hard time like trying to explain or understand NI, which is funny because I've heard NI DOM say the same thing.
Yeah, it's
Um,
apparently really hard to explain.
um, I see it though as like just something that kind of supports my TI. Like if I'm trying to think of something, um, if it's just actually just I think I explained this to somebody just recently. Um, if I'm only operating off of SE as my source of new information, it's just concrete details, and it's like it's really inefficient for my TI to like go through all these details one by one and figure out what it is. And I will step in and see the pattern and give the TI something to work with.
To like
Um,
unify SE into like a
yeah,
central concept.
yeah. It's like what are I have all these details, all these detailed facts. How are they all significant? How does it all tie together? What's relevant? What's not? TI is going to need some way to process that, and NI just kind of supports that process. Like TI and SE could work together alone, but it's a lot easier if there's like something to some easier way for me to see the big picture without having to spend all this time thinking about all these individual details. Um,
Yeah. I
and I
feel like
think
there's. Oh, sorry.
yeah, and I think it's similar for INFJs, only it's the opposite way. So their NI is what they start with because it's their dominant, and so they'll see this like this flash of intuition, like this some concept will come to them, and then their TI will try to figure out what it is, will try to make sense of it.
Yeah, it's like
So
that. It's the central idea, but because of inferior SE, they lack like the resources to kind of piece together exactly where it came from or the components that built up to it. They just have the idea and they're like, how did it get there? How do I explain this? And I feel like a lot
yeah,
of INFJs spend a lot of their life learning to translate through FE, but not being able to really explain themselves on the inside. And because of it, they can never really connect with other people, which is kind of like sad because
hmm
it's so hard to explain that they just feel like it can't be translated. And
yeah,
it should like be listened to because it has a lot of insight.
yeah. And and I've definitely noticed that in the INFJs that I've known. And it's something I've really appreciated about them.
Mm.
Um, and a lot of and for some reason, like the reasons you were saying at the beginning about how people like are annoyed with FE. I've never felt that way about FE. I've seen it as something positive because it's it's relating to people. It's the few INFJs that I've known have used that, have connected with me in that way. They've been comfortable around me, comfortable sharing what's really on their mind. And when I hear what's on their mind, it's like, oh wow, I never heard anything like this before, and it's really fascinating to me. Um, and I think it's something like my inferior FE kind of connects with that,
Mm-hmm.
with their FE, and kind of appreciates what's that connection is being made. Um,
And I think that goes to prove that there's a symbiotic relationship between the judging and perceiving functions. Like TI and FE, they depend on each other to balance each other out as two sides, or like two opposites. So if you just had extroverted feeling and no introverted thinking, then that would be a disaster, and vice versa. You need one to temper the other, even if it's dominant and inferior, but they work almost like together, like as a cycle, even if one is very stunted. And the same thing with your perceiving functions. Like you said, SE will give you like those pieces of the picture, but NI will join them together. The same thing happens with SI and NE. So if there's like an NE user and they have NE that's like generating possibilities and it's, poking holes in everything and it's, creating ideas, but in order to create those ideas, it needs points to
yeah,
connect it to, and that's SI. Just like SI starts with points and expands outward for me, I need to start with that point, and then NE can like build a whole frame around it. And
mm,
it's like they're reliant on each other. You can't have one without the other, otherwise it'll be disaster. You won't have full functioning. You'll have half of a face or like one it's like one spectrum. It's like yin and yang. You need both of them. They rely on each other. So when people like say like like SI is a stupid function or they like degrade it, I'm like, well, it's really funny you're saying that INTP because you have it too and you need it as much as you may not want to recognize it. The only difference is that they hate the negative manifestation of it, but in respects it's actually a very useful function. It's like it has its purpose with any. So I feel like people don't pay enough attention to that relationship between the functions that's necessary. And if they did recognize how they work together like that, they'd see the merit in all of them as not even individuals, but pairs and threes and fours and all that.
yeah. But how does what was I going to ask? And one thing that's always kind of been kind of a question that's been on my mind about SJs though. Now they bring up SI.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how is it that SI leads an SI user to want to cling to stuff in the past? Like,
Oh, okay. Um, SI is, well, it sees potential. And with NE, it's like, okay, let me not word this really incoherently. Um, it's good at trend setting or noticing patterns.
okay,
It can notice consistencies and inconsistencies, and because of that, it always like it can remember a lot. Like it's constantly storing data. It's taking in all these little pieces of data, and a lot of the time they're kind of floating around in there. You just can't access them without the right triggers, and you don't know what the triggers are. They just happen in front of you. So maybe you have information in your head you don't even know about, but you need something or a word or a person or an event to like spark you into remembering it. But a lot of the time, it gives you a good memory, and so say you have a relationship and the relationship starts out really well and you see with any like all these great possibilities of how it could turn out and you're seeing a lot of potential in it and you're like really excited and then things go sour and then you're remembering how things used to be and you're making that comparison with SI of like, well, this is how it used to be so good, maybe I can get there again. And so they might cling on to something that's bad for them because they see the potential in it that once existed or could exist. It's like they don't want to let it go just in case of the possibility that it can be salvaged. Like it's hard to take something and say it's not useful because and SI users can dwell. They can dwell on the little things like in a sense they really like hyper focus So they're going to have a hard time seeing the detriment of the situation they're in. So if it's like a person who's bad for them, like your ESFJ friend you were talking about, they might not notice because they're so focused that they can't see this person's clearly treating them badly, or that clearly there's something incompatible going on. They need comparisons. Like SI and NE rely on comparisons, or at least when SI is dominant over NE. It's like the way I am. I always need comparisons to things. So if I have a really crappy friendship with somebody, but it's the best friendship I have compared to my other ones, I will give it more merit because by comparison it's still a better friendship. But I won't be thinking of, well, what if I had a friend who was even better than this? I'm thinking of just what's there, and I can have a hard time letting it go because I can get used to the way it's just been. As I can get comfortable with things really easily, it can adapt, and then it starts to not see where it's hard, like hurting itself, because it's dealing with it. I think if I can deal with it, then I must be okay. You know, it just. I'm so sorry. That was a horrible explanation, but I'm trying to like piece it together
Yeah.
how it works exactly. But I mean, yeah, it's just about always being able to make those comparisons to how things were. Because the
Okay.
way I experience things is I can never experience things in the present. They're either in the past or in the future, or a combination of the both. And that's probably SI and NE. So if something happens, I will feel like I wasn't even there. But then as I reflect upon it later, I can remember all the small things, like everything that happened. I can like almost like it's more clear to me when it's already happened rather than while it's happening. Because while it's still happening, I haven't yet processed it. I need to process it. And that, or I can imagine potential things happening, and those things seem so vivid to me, like almost like they did happen, or like they could be happening because they're so realistic, I guess. But when it's like in the moment, I feel kind of like blank and numb, like there's a sheen over everything I'm seeing. I don't really see it. So um, if I process something and it's like become a set part of something I understand, and it can be hard to let it go if it was important to me at some time, because that means, I guess, betraying some part of myself. Like, oh God, this is so horrible. I'm so sorry.
Well, is it more like it makes you aware like what stuff you're already familiar with? So because
Well,
like
yeah,
you've sensed it, you've experienced it before, and so it's familiar to you. And if you're faced with a new situation, all you have is like the NE to come up with all these possibilities for how it could go, and then you like imagine the worst or whatever.
yeah, best and worst. I think imagining the worst is probably more of an ISJ thing, just because NE is inferior.
Okay.
Ironically, you can see that coming out
Yeah.
in negative manifestations where SI is dominant. NE is completely neurotic. It's like,
Hmm.
oh my God, don't pet the cat near the dinner table because you're going to inhale his hair and then get sick and die. I kid you not. I hear that constantly. And
Well, I mean, my mom does that a lot. So.
it's stronger SI then. Yeah, I mean, weaker NE will do that to a person naturally. But yeah, so SI just gets used to things, or it likes consistency to a degree. Like it feels stable in that way, to see things that it can rely on. And so it might have a hard time letting them go because that thing has become a comfortable part of the kind of mental environment that they've created. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably makes about as much sense as it can to me, because like it's not, I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, both SI and NE are just like totally foreign functions to me, and so
Yeah,
um,
that's how I feel about NI and SE. Like,
yeah,
I can pretend to be certain types of people, but it's always like impossible for me to try and like mimic or embody NI. Like it doesn't happen. So hard for me to even comprehend. Like I can understand it, but I can't emulate it. Or I'm really good at emulating people, but I can't emulate NI, or like the mentality that NI and SE users have. Like they have this like ESTPs, ISTPs, and NFJs. It's just like this way of being. It's like an unconscious rhythm I can't tap into. And so that's like part of me recognizing my limits too. Is that, yeah. Tangent again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't really know where were we going before.
And
Um, but I mean, that kind of like brings up another thing that I've noticed about ESFJs or SFJs in general is just being cautious about stuff. Maybe it's more of an SJ trait actually. Now that I
it's
think about
because
it.
of weaker NE.
Yeah,
It's because
and just
they're like can't see how the triviality of it, like it's like lack of perceiving, extroverted perceiving too, which is
yeah,
why I feel like STPs help SFJs in that way. But they're kind of like, don't take it so seriously. Look, you don't have to be so rigid about this, and they kind of like force them to be looser about it.
yeah. And like when I talk to my mom, like she'll if something happens on the news, like say there's an accident that where a pedestrian got hit by a car on a certain street and the person died. And of course, it makes the news because it was a fatality and it was a crash that stopped traffic and stuff. Well, all of a sudden that enters the realm of possibilities for my mom, and so she'll be like, don't walk down that sidewalk. You'll get hit by a car. And it's like, and I'm thinking like. You know what the odds are of that actually happening to any one person walking down that sidewalk?
My dad does this where there's one place he drives past, and like whenever he goes shopping in a certain area, he always slows down on this one part of the road because like 10 years ago he got stopped by a cop there for speeding. And that was so many years ago. And I'm like, the cop is not going to be there again. They probably don't even do that in this area anymore. Like, but he insists on it. Like, it makes him comfortable being able to slow down. And like, it's just the inability to see, to trust in things except for what they can control with SI. It's like they need NE to develop so that they can see, like, hey, despite you thinking this is going to turn out horribly, how did it actually turn out? Nothing bad happens. It's like they can see the possibility of something happening and they don't want it to happen, so they need to have control over it. They need to say, let me make sure that I've been super cautious so that I've done all I can to make sure this bad thing hasn't happened. And their only context to go off of is things that have happened before to other people. And so they try to apply it to themselves to be as safe as possible and to make sure that everything is protected that they care about. But really, it's like a lot of it is unnecessary. It's like, it's a little crazy. And it's like, I mean, I used to be that way too, a lot more. Um, or I'd be like, like, oh no, I take a lot of stuff really seriously and like make sure like everything had to be a certain way so that make sure I don't make the same mistakes other people do, but I put myself in a box. It was kind of confining. It's like you don't live that way when you put all those boundaries on your own life, like. And I've seen like I've just started paying attention, and it's like most of the things that I get freaked out about didn't really happen, so I'm confident enough in that I could handle the situation if it came in front of me. So whatever, for the most part.
How did you get to that point though of realizing that of being more comfortable and facing the
Developing,
unknown?
mostly developing myself, and I guess it was part of me like kind of like obsessively exploring the INTP realm.
Okay.
It taught me a lot about ways I could be like tapping into that inferior side of myself, and I just started thinking about the environment a lot and how things played out, and I thought about all the people that weren't like me, that were risky and on the edge, and or even like didn't care about these things. And did these things happen to them? No. And I just kind of, I guess, broke out of the constraints of SI. And yeah, researching INTPs and talking to them and learning from them really, really helped me kind of see, like, uncover the whole picture of myself. It was really helpful.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think anything could have helped me develop my weaker functions more than seeing that weaker manifestation of myself as a strength in another person right in front of me, because that's something FE could understand. And um, yeah, it's just NE. I feel like it's harder to, like the perceiving functions are harder for people to uncover because they're more unconsciously controlled than the judging functions. They're more like rooted in unconscious desire, and they're more just impulsive. So it's not like you can just tell yourself, okay, NE, get better, or let me do exercises and work on my NE. Like, no, you don't do that. It has
Yeah.
to be something that, unfolds. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just keep going back to like conversations I have with my mom. And, um, Yeah, like this past Thanksgiving weekend, it was like the first time I'd spent like gone on a vacation with my parents in like 5 years. So, um, but yeah, my mom was like, she has to like stay in a really fancy, expensive hotel just because she wants to guarantee that it's going to be a nice, comfortable experience. Um, you know, I'm more, I'll stay in like these really like the cheapest hotel in the area, or just I wouldn't even reserve a room. I'll just like I'll just be content to just like go to wherever I feel like going. It's like, okay, I'm getting tired. There's a motel. I'll just check, see if there's room there. And my mom just cannot operate like that because she's thinking like, well, what if every hotel in the area is booked? What are we gonna do? Or what if the best places one of the best places booked, and like all we can get is like this motel that's like infested with roaches, and they don't clean the sheets, and um, like yeah, I mean she's just basically again she's worried about the worst possible scenario happening, and she wants that guarantee like as far in advance as she can get to
Yeah.
that it's going to be a comfortable
Sure.
experience. Yeah, and she even said to me in an email like, well, you only live once, and so you might as well stay in the best place that you can. And I forgot what her exact phrase was, but then um, I actually replied to that, and I said, well, you only live once, you might as well just live however you want to live, and just be more adventurous. And so I'm just like being my total SP self.
Yeah.
Um,
You
yeah,
know, like part of it for your mom is like being able to like uphold the integrity of the idea of like a nice, happy like getaway or something, like she has to create
yeah,
that image for herself, the mood, in order for it to be accurate for her. But also like I learned that no matter what tight spot you're in, there's always a way out. Or at least I know that I always find a way out because there's nothing I hate more than being trapped. So like in desperation, any does work. It finds ways to deal with things. I have a high threshold for like dealing with almost everything. So like if something happened and I drove all the way over to a place and I didn't know anybody there, and um I couldn't find a hotel to stay in, then I'd probably just go find like a bus terminal or a train station and sit in there until the morning or something. Like I'm like, okay, I'll just deal with it because I have enough control over the environment. At the same time, I know that other people have been in these situations before. I can always find a way out. There's always something you can do. Like, and part of that confidence came to me from seeing that other people could just do these things. They'd go off and they'd find roadblocks like this and they'd find ways out. And I'm like, well, I just have to trust that I can too, and I could. And that's what your mom needs to do is like be able to trust that she can handle it because she probably does have the capacity to handle it. She just never tried because she's trying to play it safe all the time.
yeah,
But, so she's like trying to make sure everything goes along that path of like everything's working right.
yeah.
But,
Yeah, she probably hasn't had that kind of exposure to people. It's like which
yeah.
which is odd to me, just considering all the years that she's lived. But I don't know. I don't know. Most of the people that she gravitates towards are just like just as crazy as she is. um, but yeah, and for some reason my dad wasn't much help either. I suspect my dad is an ISTP who kind of was influenced by J values, and so he kind of
Mm.
yeah. I you
That's
know
a,
I hmm?
good.
Oh yeah. I mean it's really hard for me to type him just by observing him now, because he kind of goes along with whatever my mom wants, and so that's kind of where I kind of see it like him just kind of resigning to like, okay, well, she's gonna if she doesn't get what she wants, she's gonna complain about it, and it's not a big deal to me, so I'll just kind of go along with
Mm.
what the way she thinks things should be. Um, but most of what I know about like my dad's type, the way I suspect he's an ISTP, is from before he met my mom. The stories I've heard from both him and my mom
Mm.
about how he would he took a job on the other side of the country and drove across. He drove a Corvette, drove across, and he moved, took this job that only lasted a few months, and he knew it was a contract job. And then after it was over, he he packed up his stuff and moved all the way back. And then um, he did stuff like he was good at working on cars. He like worked on he's good at building stuff. He was like into wood shop, and he had like all these tools in his garage. He could rig stuff in really unconventional ways to get it to work. Um, and Yeah, I think, and then my mom says, oh, when she first met him, and he went and they went to his apartment, and it was like a complete mess. So yeah, just everything like kind of points to him being an ISTP, and then my mom just kind of like, I guess, kind of tamed him into her SJ
Yeah,
ways.
that's what I find so unfortunate is in a relationship when people change because of the way they're affected by the other person, but not in a positive way, in a way that almost like inhibits them from being their natural selves.
Yeah,
That's
and
like,
I definitely see that in my dad. Like, there are moments where he'll talk about things that he would like to do, but he'll say, well, no, your mom doesn't want to do that. And mostly he just kind of sits. Nowadays, he just kind of sits in his chair and like either reads or watches TV or works on Sudoku puzzles. Because like that's like the only fun he gets to have.
I feel like that just makes me sad because I see people like that a lot, and it's like when you're in a relationship with somebody, you should be able to not change yourself and kind of like walk next to them as another person rather than have you hang from their back or them hanging from your back. Like it shouldn't be like something like that that suffocates another. It should be equal, where you'd affect each other positively. And it doesn't seem to happen a lot these days because people either pick the people who are all wrong for them or they just try to make everybody like themselves. So most modern relationships are really like, ugh,
Yeah.
they're hard to look at, but
And sometimes I wonder if maybe that's why I have ESFJ issues.
maybe
But
maybe it's because you've seen the way your mom has affected your dad and because you've been affected by her too. But I mean, it makes me wonder. Like, I mean, there are sometimes I see people getting along, and usually they're like compatible types, and they have happy marriages, and they don't end up doing that to each other. I think it depends
yeah,
on how like developed a person is themselves too. Like, if they're in a healthy place, they're less likely to try and I don't know, make everybody follow their own point of view.
yeah, and just having the right values and approaching the
Yeah,
relationships in a healthy way. And I'm sure that if I could get in a relationship with an ESFJ, if such a situation developed like that, it's just based on my experiences,
yeah,
with other ESFJs, it's hard for me to imagine that happening, but it's something that could happen. They say, I think it was Kierkegaard's theory, or Kersey,
yeah.
however that's
Kiersey's
pronounced.
theory for compatibility. I was just about to ask you about that. That's probably like
Yeah.
the only thing that I really agree with him on is, or give him merit for, is his compatibility theory in his second book.
Hmm.
That's the one that seems to play out with the most accuracy for compatibility.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny. That was actually being discussed just earlier today on the NF Geeks forum.
Oh, really?
They were talking about that relationship dynamic, and I was the one who kind of pointed out, then why do I have so many issues getting along with ESFJs? And
It's. I feel like the way
yeah,
it is that you and that type, because you're different enough, if you're just like naturally in your own type areas, then there's going to be like a giant roadblock between you. And until you overcome it, you'll have conflicts with them. But if you can overcome that roadblock, then after that, you have no problems whatsoever. It's what
yeah,
happened between me and my ISTP friend. It took us almost a little while. Like, we didn't like each other at first, and then we became close friends. And then we were really young, and she kind of like ditched me for an ESTJ girl. They ended up having a falling out, and now me and her we haven't fought in years. We've been like inseparable. Like I don't see her for months, but it doesn't matter. We come back to each other like it's nothing. The same thing happened for my sister and her ENTP friend. She's an INFJ. And
uh,
it just depends. Like a lot of the types will have falling outs where even if they're compatible, they won't work. But that's because those people aren't like, they're not reaching that point where they compromise themselves for the other person, or they're not reaching that roadblock. They're not, like, they have to click, but it always takes some time. Like it takes a little effort. It doesn't just fall into place usually. Like it falls into place, but it also doesn't. If that makes sense. Like from what I've seen, with introverted feelers, it's a little bit different. Uh oh.
uh,
I didn't even notice you went
oh,
out.
okay.
I'm I'm just talking to myself here.
Uh,